Senator, I noticed that there's a picture of you with Eisenhower. And can you tell me a little bit about that?
Right. I was elected to Congress in 1960, and Ike was still here until, what is it, March or April of the next year. And so I asked if I could come to the White House and get a picture, and somebody said yes, and so that's the picture.
That's the picture. So you were a new House of Representative, correct?
A what?
You were a representative with the House?
Yes, then I was in the House from Western Kansas.
Yep. So tell me about your meeting. What did you guys talk about? How did it make you feel?
Well, it made me feel great because Ike was my hero, and I'd met him a couple of times in the hospital where he was recovering. But then when I came to Congress in 61, he was, of course, still around. So we had a little chat, and I'm certainly talked about Abilene, but I can't remember what we said.
So do you remember anything from that meeting in particular, either something he said or how he made you feel?
Well, Eisenhower made me feel good. He was my overall commander in Europe. You know, Ike was very popular with the troops because he'd go around and visit, and that made him feel good.
So I'm going to ask you a couple questions relative to when he was your general, but let me first ask you, when's the first time you met Eisenhower?
First time I think was 1960 in Kansas. He was in Abilene, and he hadn't announced for president at that time. So I can't remember what year it was. But
so you met him before he'd announced to become president?
Yes. Oh, announced?
Oh, that's what I thought I heard you just say. When's the first time you met him?
First time I met him was in Abilene, Kansas. I think he was thinking about running for president. And of course, he got a lot of encouragement from our state, Kansas. And he was, again, very popular, so it just sort of spread. And he won easily.
What was the occasion in which you met him?
Well, he was in the hospital at Walter Reed. And I go there quite often, and one time I was there, I asked if I could see the general, and they did, and we had a nice visit. You know, he could just excite me by showing up. He's such a great guy.
Did you ever play golf or have any social time with him?
No.
No.
He liked golf. Something about golf the president seemed to like. I don't know.
Maybe that it gets him out of the office, right?
Right, gets them out and gets them away from, so the people can do their work. Yeah. And I don't do any work, so I don't need to worry about it.
Well, so you met him the first time he was thinking about running for president. What capacity were you in at that point? You said you met him in Abilene.
I was a young Republican, not in office, and of course I was, as I said twice already, Eisenhower was my hero, so every opportunity I had, I'd try to say hello or something.
Okay. So I want to ask you now back to him being your general, as you mentioned. I mean, not your direct general, but the commander in
Right, he
chief.
is the overall commander.
Correct. So you're over there, young 20-something-year-old soldier.
Right.
What was your impression of him as a general?
Well, again, I didn't have any contact with him, but we won the war because of Ike's leadership. And a lot of brave Americans who lost their lives or ended up with a lifelong disability. But that's what happened in the war. People get hurt.
Did you ever have a chance to talk to him about your experience as a soldier in World War II? No. What was your impression of him as a leader? Meaning, what type of leader was he in your eyes?
Well, he was very cautious, but he'd make up his own mind, and then he would make a statement on whatever might have been under discussion. But I don't know. He just.
There's different leadership styles. Is there a certain leadership style that you would peg him with?
I couldn't pair him with someone else, but Eisenhower was very careful before he made a judgment. And I think that made him even more popular with the troops.
Was there any time when you now are a senator or representative, either one, where maybe there was something that previously happened either as Eisenhower's president or Eisenhower's general that you at the time didn't understand, but now that you're in this position of leadership yourself, knowing what you now know, where you had an aha moment and you went, wow, now I understand why Eisenhower made a certain decision or acted a certain way?
Yeah, I'm not certain I was as careful as Ike. But I think I did learn a little from him because he wasn't a big talker, and I was, I guess. Being in the Senate, you got to talk a lot.
Okay. I noticed on the back wall there you have a picture of Eisenhower with the paratroopers, and then there's a copy of something that he penned and voiced on July 5th. I'm pretty sure it was probably 1942 there. I'm curious why you have that hanging on your wall. You know what I'm talking about?
It's a picture with the airborne troops where they're painting their faces right before D-Day.
Oh.
So,
You want to move around?
I don't know how it came.
The quote about if there's any blame to be attributed.
Oh, right. Well, I think, Eisenhower was willing to take the responsibility as a commander, and therefore he had, being the overall commander in Europe, he had irons in the fire everywhere. And he was a great general.
Awesome. So obviously, there's two famous people who grew up in Kansas, and one's name is Eisenhower, but the other one is Bob Dole.
I'm not sure about the latter one, but I'll run again. I don't know.
There you go. Why not?
I'm only 95. So.
We do need
Yeah.
In all your world travels, what made you most proud of being from Kansas?
Well, I took Kansas with me whenever I'd go overseas to some, you know, congressional delegation.
When you say you took Kansas with you, what do you mean by that?
Well, I'm Kansas, and so whenever we'd go on a trip, I could spread the Kansas, I don't know what, culture, I guess.
Outstanding. So, what is it about you believe maybe your upbringing in Kansas or being somebody from Kansas that you and Eisenhower share as being two boys raised in Kansas?
Well, I had very good parents. My mother was very strict, but we got along fine. I had two sisters and a brother who are now gone, and I'm sort of the last of the Dole family.
Mm.
Not going anywhere because I don't have grandchildren.
So, have you ever thought about what you had that was similar to President Eisenhower?
Well, we both came from great state, and both had, of course, he had all kinds of military service, but we both had military service. And I don't know, I guess I wasn't very lucky in the war.
You're both political leaders, but I'm just curious, like your upbringing in Kansas. I'm sorry to kind of go on that, but I would believe as a young boy, what did you cherish that maybe later in life you're like, because I grew up in Kansas, this is what made me unique, or this is what was unique about that?
Well, my sisters and brother, we got along fine, and trying to think, I graduated from high school and then went to the University of Kansas for a year and a half, 2 years. My grades were so bad, I've got them to agree on burying my transcript. But then I went off to war and came back, and law school made all A's and 1 B. So I went from the bottom to not quite the top, pretty close.
It's amazing what a little time in the service will do to focus you on your schoolwork, right?
Right.
All right, so I won't take a lot more of your time, but I'm wanting to ask you. Obviously you and Eisenhower both went on to become global political leaders. Did you ever consult with him on any specific issues? I mean, he may have no longer been president,
Yeah.
but you were just dealing with some things and you consulted him.
I can't recall asking for anything, but that's been a long time ago.
Okay. Let's see, I'm scanning through my own questions here to see what I haven't asked you. So when you were serving in World War II, and obviously you knew Eisenhower was from Kansas and he's your Supreme Allied Commander, did you ever have any thoughts about him and about him being from Kansas? Like,
Oh, I'm sure I did. Because as I've said, he was my hero, so I kept pretty close track of the general.
Okay. Well, so my interest is in talking with you about your combat experiences, and I'd like to start with when you first landed in Italy. I assume that was, based on everything I've read, where it began. And do you recall that first moment when you arrived? Did you arrive by ship or by plane?
Well, we arrived by ship, and we were in a replacement depot. In other words, if some second lieutenant was injured, or
Mhm.
they'd reach into this group of us and pick one out to take the person's place who'd either died or injured.
And so you didn't realize you were going to be in the 10th Mountain Division at that time?
No, in fact, they did a lot of training in Camp Vale, and I missed all that. They were all skiers, and I didn't ski. I don't know if they're all skiers, most of them. But
And
it was a good, intelligent division.
And where did you arrive in Italy? Do you recall the port?
I arrived in Naples.
And then where did you meet your unit, your new unit?
I met my new unit in northern Italy. Probably a month after I landed.
And what impressions did you have of Italy? By that time, I guess Rome had been liberated and Anzio had happened and Monte Cassino, and must have been a lot of battle damage and a lot of signs of war. What were your impressions?
My overall impression of Italy is it was and still is a beautiful country. And we were assigned to take out some Germans on a little hill on the 14th of April, 1945. And my radio man had been hit, and I went out of the little ravine to pull him to safety. Is when I got hit, which was pretty severe, but worked out all right.
And you were hit by machine gun fire?
Well, I think I was hit by shrapnel from the Germans who had the high ground. And unfortunately, my radio man didn't survive.
Senator, what was your first combat experience in Italy? Do you recall your very first experience with combat?
Yeah, I think it all happened at once. I mean, once I was in the replacement depot, and when I was called to take another second lieutenant's place who had been injured, and my first real combat is the day I was wounded.
Oh, wow. How did you feel going into that day?
Well, we were all kind of sad because Roosevelt had died, President Roosevelt, which delayed our push a day because we were all young guys and all FDR fans, and he was our commander-in-chief. And so we were all kind of shook up, and so we delayed our departure one day. I often wondered what would have happened if we hadn't waited. You know, you have to think about good things even though you can't have them.
And so leading up to your injury that day, what other experiences did you have?
Well, I had a lot of experiences in the Army, and I still meet with veterans every Saturday morning at the World War II Memorial when the weather is not too hot or cold. So it'll be another month. I'll be headed to the World War II Memorial on a Saturday to meet veterans. I've been doing it for 9 years, and I've met thousands of men and women.
I know it's incredibly appreciated.
Oh, we have a great time, yeah.
And sir,
And they're women too. They're nurses and Women's Army Corps.
and sir, on the day you were injured, your objective was to take a hill. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're trying to push the Germans out of Italy. Just pushing them north.
And how after you said you advanced, how long after that was it before you were injured? Was it a few hours or was it?
Yeah, a few hours.
And in those few hours, did you have what other experiences did you have leading up to your injury,
Huh.
if you even recall?
Boy, that's too far. I can't recall.
It must have been frightening, especially being a replacement. Being a replacement, not necessarily even knowing your men. That must have been very difficult, I would think.
Yeah, there were about 20 of us second lieutenants who were in a replacement depot. And what you got? Oh, okay.
And so did you go as a group to deploy?
No, there were about 20 of us in a replacement depot, and when there was a death or an injury of a platoon leader, second lieutenant, they'd take one from the replacement depot. I don't know how I got picked, but it was a mountain division, and I couldn't ski. So
And so when you were injured, did you were there in that ravine for quite a few hours, injured, correct?
oh yeah, all day.
And what was going through your mind?
Well, I couldn't move anything. I couldn't move my arms and my legs. And I didn't know what my injury was, except that my right shoulder was aching.
And were you treated in the field by the medics?
Yes, by the medics who first came by and gave me morphine and put a big M on my forehead. So the medic coming through wouldn't give me more morphine. So I remember that distinctly.
And do you recall being evacuated?
Yep. Can't remember who, but I was there most of the day. I don't know.
Do you remember anything else while you were laying there injured? Do you recall the battle going on around you?
Oh yeah, you could hear the noise, artillery, but I was out of it.
And so what's the next thing you remember after that? Do you recall waking up in the hospital?
Well, I went to a field hospital first, which is sort of like a big first aid station where they determine how serious your injury may be.
And at that point, you went on to I guess the stabilize, and then at some point they shipped you back to the United States.
Right. I remember landing in Miami and calling my parents. And I went from Miami to Topeka, Kansas, and stayed there 3 or 4 months, and then went to Percy Jones Hospital in Michigan, Battle Creek.
And did the community rally behind you and during your recovery process?
Oh, yeah. My little town of Russell, I mean, it's about 5,000 or 6,000. And my mother, God rest her soul, was there every day, would stay all day. And I'd taken up smoking overseas. And she had to hold my cigarettes, and she didn't care much for smokers. But that's what mothers do for their children.
And what do you recall about Russell, the people in Russell? What did they do for you?
Well, the first thing they did was they had a cigar box in Dawson's drugstore where I worked as a young guy, collecting money so that I might go to another doctor. And that was very successful. I don't mean millions, but thousands. We raised a few. And the people in my hometown have been wonderful ever since.
What do you think it was that enabled you to recover through such a difficult injury? Were there certain mental things that you focused on that helped you get through it?
Yeah, I think if I was, not that I'm a hero, but if anything close to that would be my recovery. I mean, I really worked and worked. Finally was able to walk, and I only have good feeling in my little finger and the next finger in my left hand. So it can't button your shirt.
And so, any other memories from your time in Italy? Did you feel, did you have anything else you recall seeing or experiencing when you were there?
Well, I remember during the sort of the battle site, and I'm trying to think of the famous skier who was dead, and we came across his body, Tokel, or my memory's shot.
And you saw his body after he was killed?
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
That time, as you prepared to approach your combat experience, were you, what was your mindset like? Were you eager and excited, or was it trepidation and fear, or what's that like?
Well, it was trepidation. I'm not sure about fear, but you kind of thought about what's going to happen and da-da-da. And it happened.
So what your recovery was just such a heroic one as I believe it to be. And what do you take away from that? I mean, what kind of lessons, today's generation that often doesn't have the military experience at the same volume, what kind of things would you have people take away from that experience?
Well, the experience left me in not very good shape for the last 74 years. But I get out and go to work. In fact, I'm supposed to be working now. It's okay.
You obviously went on to be a great leader. How do you think your experiences in World War II contributed to your leadership style and just your desire to lead in the Senate?
Well, I think it's my parents who really charted my future because they were just good, hardworking. We lived in the basement, so we could rent out the upstairs because times were pretty tough. But the people of my hometown, just can't say enough nice about them. And I got a lot of relatives, and they were all very nice. Still are.
That's great. Emily, do you have any questions?
I do have one. Senator, how do you want future generations to remember the World War II veterans?
Well, if we can just get the young people to focus on history for 1 hour, it would help. But I think as far as giving any advice, it would be hard to tell anyone coming into the service what to expect, because I never expected to have thing happen to me, but it did.
Yeah, did those? How did the people of Italy greet you in the town where you were injured?
Well, I went back there, I can't remember how many years after I was wounded. And I remember in the 96 election, they had posters all over Casteldiano, Bob Dole for president. And I carried Casteldiano, but it's the wrong country. Oh, but we had a great time.
Is there anything in particular that you're very proud of during your time of serving?
In the Army or in the Senate?
Let's start with the Army.
The Army? Well, I guess I was most proud of going from a private to a captain, which I thought was pretty good for me. And now there's a bill in Congress to make me a colonel.
Oh, wow.
Well, and I think it's going to be taken up very soon. I don't believe it's political. I mean, I love Democrats who vote for me too. And other Democrats too.
Well, let me ask you something about that you did very quickly go from basically a young man that is brought in to serve to leading his platoon. And can you tell us a little bit about that experience, about what you felt were some of the leadership qualities that you possessed?
Right. Well, first I didn't know I possessed any, but then I was voted in as the leader. And so I did a lot of quick studies and I was pretty familiar with Congress and the Senate. And I think I won the election by 3 votes. There were 5 candidates. But
What I'm asking specifically is you became a leader of your troop, of your platoon very quickly. And
Oh,
yet
yeah.
you didn't have any combat experience and really not a ton of training. So I'm just curious what you felt was the reason for your rise,
my rise.
your becoming their leader.
Oh. Well, I was a private, and I was in the artillery, and they picked me out to go to OCS, Officer Candidate School. And so I did that, and everything else followed.
Did you get good grades?
In school?
No, in your officer training school.
Oh, yeah, I did pretty well.
So it must have been something you really liked.
Yeah, I did. I liked it. It was young, healthy guys.
So what were some of the things that you learned from your military service that you carried with you into being one of our world political leaders?
Well, my disability, I think, probably stands out because I have been able to participate and do a lot of things.
When you meet with the World War II veterans, as you mentioned, on Saturdays, what is it that you say to them?
Well, first I find out, what conflict they were in, war. It's pretty easy to tell this World War II veterans because there are not many of us left. But they're mostly Korean and Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. We visit about our family. They'll say, "Where's Elizabeth today?" I said, "Well, if I bring her, nobody talks to me." So we eliminated her right off the bat. Except she has gone on a couple of occasions. Caught me kissing one of the women, I think.
That's fun.
That's good stuff, right?
That is great
World War
stuff.
III, right?
Now, did you vote for Eisenhower when he ran for president?
Oh, I'm sure I did.
Both times, huh?
Yeah.
When you ran for president, did you ever think about the other boy from Kansas who was president before you?
Well, I'm sure I thought about Ike. Yeah.
Did he ever provide you any advice?
No.
No.
He did give me a photo. And I did visit with him in the hospital. But he thought humor was important for generals, politicians, TV commentators, whatever. So,
One last thing. I shouldn't say one last. I'll probably think of one more. But what is something you feel like you have in common with Eisenhower besides being from Kansas?
well, it's hard for me to even think about comparing me with Eisenhower because, he's West Point, didn't graduate first in his class, but he won the war in Europe, and I was a part of it, very small. And I paid a price for it. But at 95, I don't worry too much about it.
You've learned to live with it, huh?
Yeah, I think for another 10, 20 years.
Well, I'm glad you're going to be around that long.
Yeah, you can interview me again on my 100th birthday.
Outstanding. Well, I'm hoping you'll be in Abilene this year for the 75th anniversary of D-Day,
Oh, yeah, when? It's,
June 6th this year.
yeah, well, that's the magic date.
Is there anything else you guys have?
I don't think so.
So here's one last thing I wanted to ask if I could have you put on camera. So we have this program where we're interviewing, we are interviewing World War II veterans. And so I'd love for you to just say something to the camera that we could use and say, I encourage all my fellow World War II veterans to get interviewed. Tell your stories. We need to
And
capture
come to
those for
visit
history.
your memorial.
Come to visit the Eisenhower Presidential Library.
That's true, yeah.
Because that'll bring some money to Kansas. We want them to come there.
Wow.
So if you like, I'll ask it. So Senator Dole, what would you say to other World War II veterans about sharing their story?
Well, we were known as the silent generation. Nobody talked. You talk to their grandkids and Grandpa never told me anything about the war. We were, I think, about the silent generation. And some World War II vets haven't talked about it since. So it's very important.
And so you feel it's important for World War II veterans to share their stories?
Oh, yeah. I think it, you know, I think it takes the burden away if you just put it all out there and let people make a judgment.
I think it's also a service. It's a form of service
It is.
because it's a history that's unique.
I've been doing it for 9 years, and I think I've met, well, I know I've met thousands of veterans.
Senator, I have one last question. Did you ever meet a gentleman named Ben Grant, who was the president of the U.S. Press Corps back in the 70s? He was the editor of U.S. News and World Report. Does that name resonate with you at all? He may have been someone you
Yeah,
might
well,
not
I
have met.
knew a guy he was my hometown, Pfleger, Phlegar, but not the other one.
Well, thank you so much. It was just an extraordinary honor for us to have the opportunity to meet you, and thank you so much for your service, both in the war and in post-war as well. It's just really extraordinary for you to share your time with us today. So thank you.
Thank you.